Hello Summoners and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan Ng and I'm here with the 12.8 mid-patch update. We'll provide updated tier lists for all 5 roles and follow up on balance changes from the patch. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content like this. Now, let's get started. First off, we'll be talking about our top laners. Before we get into anything else, we'll talk a little bit about Sion. A lot of people lately have been talking about how disgustingly strong he is because the boss very quickly climbed straight to Challenger in Korea using the classic suicide split pushing strat on Sion. So you may be wondering why he's down in the B tier on our list. The thing is, the boss is pretty much the only person that can consistently pull this off at such a high level. It's definitely broken when done right, but it's really hard to actually do, or else we'd see dozens of players hitting the top of the ladder doing it. It's a toxic, unhealthy thing for the game, but it's not as mindless as it seems. Most people just end up inting on it without actually providing much map pressure. So since this is our list aimed at the average player, somewhere between high gold and plat, we can't really say a strat that requires flawless execution belongs high up on the list. But on a very closely related note, Yorick gets moved up to the S tier, bordering on being good enough to be in the OP tier. He utilizes the same perma-splitting strategy as Sion, but rather than just pushing until you die, you actually aim to kill or at least bully out your opponent. Since the strat doesn't involve consistently having double-digit deaths, it's not nearly as risky nor toxic. You're just taking a champion that bullies the hell out of the other melee champions, and using him to be a constant huge source of pressure. It's almost no exaggeration to say that almost no other champion can duel Yorick post 6, as long as you play around your maiden right. Yep, that's right everybody, you heard it correctly. If you play Yorick, you will no longer be maidenless. Eventually, it just reaches the point where you can dive whoever tries to hold you under an inner or even inhibitor turret if they don't get any help. Kledd's been performing super well lately, so we're moving him up to the S tier. Learning Kled can be a little bit awkward, so he may not feel so strong at first, but once you get used to his wonky trading patterns, he's actually pretty lane dominant. And once he gets a lead, it's really hard to come back against him. On top of being a strong side laner, he also provides engage for the entire team. This can be super useful for enabling other allies that want to dive into fights but don't really have mobility of their own. When we first added Zac to the tier list as a top laner, he was performing super well. But just as some champions have a learning curve when it comes to playing as them, so too do they have one for playing against them. As people learn to deal with his trading, it seems like he's not quite so lane dominant. That being said, there's only so much you can do to play around him, and he's still very strong, enough to be in the S tier. He's just not quite as oppressive as the champions in the OP tier. Pantheon gets moved up to the A tier. His recent buffs have made it quite a bit better at bullying lane, and since his entire identity is built around doing well early, then snowballing and closing out the games fast, it makes sense that he's doing better all around. Camille gets moved up to our B tier. This isn't to say that she's necessarily bad. She's definitely a super strong carry when you have good mechanics, but she has become a bit more of a matchup dependent pick. She gets smashed by a lot of the strong meta top laners right now: Poppy, Shen, Ornn, Garen, and the list goes on. If any of those champions get a lead on you, it's very difficult to reach the point where you can go ahead and fight them. So you want to pick her against easier lane opponents that will allow you to be the bully, so that we can get an early lead and reach her strong 2-item spike and take over the game. Both Gragas and Maokai get demoted to the C tier. We previously had them in the B tier since there could be some argument that they were at least viable in certain situations, but anytime either of them is a good pick, there are so many other better options. The only time Maokai is good is when you're picking him as a support, where the utility of his saplings and having a flash root makes the pick pretty good. But in the top lane, you need champs that are strong all-arounders, with ability to win or at least hold down his side lane, and are useful more than once every 5 minutes. Now for the jungle, here's our list. When Wukong first got his buffs, we were pretty sure that he was going to be insanely strong, but with more players trying him out, at first he was actually doing worse statistically speaking, so we ended up moving him down on the tier list. But as people have actually learned how to play him right, he's skyrocketed, becoming one of the very best performing champions in the game, with around a 53% win rate overall, and just under a 54% win rate in plat specifically, where he does best. So we are recorrecting our tier list placement and moving him up to the OP tier. His super strong dueling makes him a pick that never has to concede fights to the enemy jungler, and if early skirmishes do happen, you should always come out on top. His super strong early game is by no means a precursor to him falling off later. In fact, Wu is even stronger in the mid to late game, where his ultimate gives both good engage and absolutely insane damage. With a ton of pros and no real cons, he's definitely a jungler that you should consider abusing. And I really didn't want to put this one on the list because I was playing him a lot and winning all the time. But you know, hopefully you guys get that OP as well. Fiddlesticks just gets bumped up to the OP tier. Deciding to promote him took a little bit of thinking. If you end up against a super aggressive jungler and your team just ravenously int all 3 lanes, Fiddle's complete lack of early game presence means that you're not going to be able to stop the bleeding. So it's very possible to have some games where you just absolutely have no say whether you win or lose. Can a champ truly be in the OP tier if that's the case? Well, after thinking about how insanely strong his teamfighting is, I can confidently say that yes, he does. The games where you can literally do nothing are fringe cases. They are a lot fewer and further in between than you think. Anyway, Fiddlesticks Ultimate is just a huge game changer. Even when your team is behind, it can win fights, and I don't mean as in down a couple thousand of gold. I mean, your team can be down 3 dragons and 10k gold, and a good Fiddle ult can make an easy ace. If there were more early game threats in the meta, Fiddle could be a little bit riskier, but at the moment there aren't, so he doesn't really belong any lower than the OP tier. Mordekaiser really moves up to the S tier. While the buffs to his passive helped him a little bit as a top laner, they are really shining through in the jungle. We underestimated him big time by putting him in the A tier. Mordekaiser's kit already makes him a super good jungler. He could win a vast majority of 1v1 fights, especially post 6. But his issue was translating a lead, since he could be kited by most high priority targets. With this patch solving that, he's good into pretty much all situations now. Sejuani on the other hand actually gets demoted to the B tier. Yeah, even though she got a buff this patch, Sejuani jungle really isn't all that great. It's just way too situational of a pick. She doesn't win very many 1v1s early, and in few matchups where she can, your opponent can literally just walk away. The only time Sejuani is actually really good is when you have a melee champion to camp for that can proc your E for you, but even then, there's probably even better options. Now, here's our mid lane tier list. First up, we have Tristana moving up to the OP tier. Even before these buffs, there were quite a few high elo players who thought that Tristana mid was actually being heavily slept on, and wondered why she had fallen out of the meta. Now that she's even stronger, there's no way that she doesn't deserve a spot way up at the top. All her potential is deadly, being one of the only champions that can truly nuke somebody from 100 to 0 in a single all-in. And once you get the ball rolling with Tristana, it's a very hard snowball for opponents to stop. While she's basically the exact opposite of Tristana, Kayle also gets moved up to the OP tier. Rather than just playing to dominate all foes with extreme all-ins, with Kayle, you're basically just AFK farming. Well, that's just putting things a little bit too simply. Kayle really isn't as weak early as people make her out to be. Pre-6, sure. Being melee with no real consistent damage means that you're gonna lose lane to most people. But once you're level 6, you get ranged autos and can actually trade pretty decently, so laning gets a lot better. All you really need is Nashor's Tooth, and you're able to deal with most enemies 1v1. But your goal is ultimately to reach level 11 and 2 items. At that point, you're really online and can carry hard. With his mid-scope update, Swain's new kit sounds really OP, but we knew that his stats won't really show it. And we were right. He landed in a pretty mediocre spot. So, for now, we're putting him in the B tier, but this is tentative. He could easily shoot up depending on how well he ends up performing as people learn him. Now let's move things down to the bot lane. Twitch will be taking his rightful spot in the OP tier. We probably should have made this change a little bit earlier. He's the most consistent hyper carry in the game, but also just the best marksman period. When you have a champion that scales insanely hard, outdoing even the early game bullies in laning phase, something is up. If you main ADC, and cry that your role is weak, when you have a champion like Twitch at your disposal, you deserve all those Jannas that sit behind tower, and Yumis that never detach. I'm sorry, that's mean, I take that back. Anyway, Vayne trades places with Twitch, moving down to the S tier. She's still super good, with surprisingly strong laning for a hyper carry, but she's just not quite as reliable as other champions in the OP tier. As with the mid lane, things are a little bit too tentative to really say where we think Swain will end up. The armor buff Hotfix really helped his bumpy release, but his performance in bot lane is still pretty lackluster, so for now we'll be keeping him in the B tier here as well. When we said that we'd keep an eye on Jinx in our patch rundown, it was because we thought that maybe we were overestimating the nerfs. Maybe she'd still be quite strong, and be put a little bit higher up in the S tier. But we actually underestimated those nerfs. She's doing a lot worse than we predicted at the moment, so we're moving her down to the C tier. She still does a ton of damage at 3 items, but the issue is getting there. That 50 HP apparently made a huge difference in most cases, and with her laning phase becoming so much more difficult to survive, you don't really get the chance to scale with her. Xayah also moves down to the C tier. As predicted, those nerfs hit pretty hard. And honestly, even in situations where she's pickable, there's always a better option. If you really need safety on your ultimate, pick a mage that can build Zhonya's instead. To finish things off, we have our supports. It looks like we overestimated how hard the nerfs would hit Soraka, and she's right back being up in the OP tier. I guess when you take some ridiculously over the top levels of healing and give them a small nerf, they're still pretty over the top. Honestly, I think this just shows how bad Ryze balancing is at understanding how to actually balance champions, but I don't blame him, it's a tough job. Soraka should definitely have healing, that's her entire identity. Rather than focusing on the power of healing on allies, they should probably make changes that make it easier to go for all-ins against Soraka, make her squishier, or make her Q slow less, or give her less movement speed. I just wish these nerfs were a little bit more creative than just pulling levers and pressing buttons that just increase or decrease the amount of healing and damage that the spells put out. Blitzcrank has fallen off a bit, and we're moving him down to the S tier. He's still a really solid wildcard pick and can win games with just a single good hook, but he just isn't doing quite as well as others in the OP tier. Nautilus gets demoted down 2 whole tiers, falling down to the A tier. Honestly, there's even a good argument to put him in the B tier, since he's got quite a few bad matchups. But providing engage means that he's always at least somewhat useful outside of laning phase. A lot of people may argue against this since Nautilus is regarded as a very popular pick in high elo, but remember, this tier list is distinctly set apart from high elo. When you look at plat and gold games, Naut isn't really all that impressive. And that about wraps things up for our 12.8 mid-patch update. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and feel free to let me know your thoughts on where the champions fall in the tier list down in the comment section below. Also, check out the description for a link to join our Discord community. Have good luck on your games, and you know the drill. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.